January 10th, 1969. Twickenham Film Studios, London. George Harrison stands up in the middle of a Beatles rehearsal, puts down his guitar, and says 5 words. "I'm leaving the band now." He does not say "I'm thinking about it." He does not say "we need to talk." He just leaves. His diary entry that night reads, "Got up, went to Twickenham, rehearsed until lunchtime, left the Beatles, went home." Yoko Ono was sitting in the room when this happened. She had been there for weeks, on a bed John had installed for her next to his amplifier. And for 56 years the world has blamed her for what went wrong. She is the woman who broke up the Beatles, the interloper, the wedge. Except George Harrison did not leave because of Yoko Ono. He left because Paul McCartney would not stop telling him how to play guitar. He left because John Lennon was barely speaking to anyone who was not Yoko. He left because Ringo Starr had already quit once, 5 months earlier, during the White Album sessions, when he walked out of Abbey Road for 2 weeks because, in his words, "I felt unloved and out of it." He left because 4 men who had spent 7 years fused together at the molecular level had started to come apart, and being filmed while it happened was unbearable. Harrison summed it up with a deadpan that cuts deeper than any analysis. "Maybe we should have a divorce." After an awkward silence, Lennon replied in kind. "It would help the children. The fractures predated Yoko. All of them. And the argument of this story is one that nobody wants to hear. Yoko Ono did not break up the Beatles. She saved them from something worse. Because without someone to blame, 4 men who were already done with each other would have spent another decade tearing each other apart instead of walking away clean enough to stay friends. Yoko gave them the exit door, and, more importantly, she gave them the scapegoat that let them keep their friendships intact after they walked through it. Start with what was already broken. Brian Epstein died of a sedative overdose on August 27, 1967. He had been the Beatles' manager since 1962, the man who organized their chaos, mediated their disputes, and handled every business decision so the 4 of them never had to fight about money. The band had just released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band that summer, their creative peak. But Epstein's death left them rudderless. McCartney said it plainly during the Get Back sessions. He said they were always fighting that discipline. There really was no one there anymore to say do it. Daddy was gone away now. Harrison agreed that the Beatles had been in the doldrums for at least a year, and that since Mr. Epstein passed away, it had never been the same. So the structural collapse started in 1967. Yoko did not enter John's life until 1968. Then came the White Album sessions in the summer and fall of 1968, the most fractious recording period in Beatles history. Even producer George Martin struggled to keep the peace, as Paul McCartney was writing complete songs and handing the other 3 their parts like session musicians. George Harrison resented it. John Lennon was descending into heroin use and checking out emotionally. Ringo Starr quit in August because he felt the other 3 did not need him. Starr recalled that he felt he was not playing great, and that the other 3 were really happy, and he was an outsider. When he came back, the other 3 had decorated his drum kit with flowers, but the flowers did not fix anything. By January 1969, during the Jet Back sessions, Lennon was so deep into heroin that by multiple accounts he was barely functional. McCartney was trying to hold everything together by sheer force of personality, which meant he was bossing everyone around. McCartney scolded Lennon, asking if he had written anything else, and warned they were going to be faced with a crisis. Harrison, meanwhile, had just spent months with Bob Dylan and the band in Woodstock, collaborating as equals, and coming back to the Beatles hierarchy felt suffocating. He had a backlog of brilliant songs including All Things Must Pass, and the band treated them as afterthoughts. The day Harrison walked out, Lennon's response was chilling. He said, "The point is, George leaves, and do we want to carry on as the Beatles?" "I certainly do." He suggested replacing Harrison with Eric Clapton. When the 4 of them met at Ringo's house 2 days later to hash it out, Yoko kept speaking on John's behalf. Harrison walked out of that meeting too. He came back days later, but with conditions. No more live concert plans, no more Twickenham, and Yoko stays. Lennon said, "Yoko only wants to be accepted. She wants to be one of us." Ringo replied, "She is not a Beatle, John, and she never will be." Lennon did not blink. He said, "Yoko is part of me now. We are John and Yoko. We are together. That is the moment everyone points to. That is the smoking gun." Lennon chose Yoko over the band. But look at what was actually happening. Lennon wasn't choosing Yoko over the Beatles. He was choosing himself. He had outgrown the band, creatively, personally, spiritually. The Plastic Ono band with Yoko was already giving him an outlet the Beatles could not. His song Cold Turkey, his raw confession of heroin withdrawal, had been rejected by the Beatles as a single. When he performed at the Toronto Rock and Roll Revival in September 1969, with a pickup band, Clapton, Klaus Voormann, and Alan White, the freedom of it crystallized everything. On the plane back to London, Lennon told Allen Klein that it was over. September 20th, 1969, a meeting at Apple Corps. Klein was there, McCartney was there, Starr was there, Yoko was there, Harrison was absent. Klein was explaining the details of the renegotiated Capitol Records contract, a massive deal, 25% royalties, the highest ever paid to an artist. While Klein was talking, Lennon interrupted. Lennon said, "I want a divorce." McCartney called it a showstopper. Lennon later compared the adrenaline rush to telling his first wife Cynthia he wanted out. "I started the band, I disbanded it, it's as simple as that." But it was not that simple. While Lennon was the one who said the words, the other three had each already tried to leave. Ringo quit in August 1968. Harrison quit in January 1969. McCartney had been emotionally checked into his own solo career since Linda entered his life. The Beatles were four people who all wanted out, but none of them wanted to be the one who said it. And then, the business fight made it permanent. McCartney wanted his father-in-law, Lee Eastman, a prominent entertainment lawyer, and his brother-in-law, John Eastman, to manage the Beatles' affairs, including their lucrative Northern Songs publishing catalog. Lennon, Harrison, and Starr wanted Allen Klein, the same Allen Klein who had managed the Rolling Stones and Mick Jagger, and whom the Stones later warned the Beatles about. A 3-1 vote. McCartney lost, refused to sign Klein's contract, and the partnership fractured along legal lines that would take 5 years and a lawsuit to resolve. Klein got the job because Lennon championed him. Lennon championed him because Klein did something brilliant in their first meeting at the Dorchester Hotel. He quoted Lennon's own lyrics back to him. He praised Yoko as a serious artist, and he convinced Lennon they were the same kind of person, streetwise men who had clawed their way up. Lennon walked out of that meeting saying he did not give a bugger who anybody else wanted, but he was having Allen Klein for himself. On the evening of May 9th, 1969, Klein waited outside Olympic Sound Studios while Lennon, Harrison, and Starr, at Klein's behest, demanded McCartney sign a 3-year management deal immediately. McCartney refused. The three stormed off. McCartney was left alone with their recording session. When the Beatles eventually signed with Klein, McCartney pulled a quiet act of defiance. He pretended to sign the contract but never actually put his name on it. Rob Sheffield listed Klein, Yoko, Linda Eastman, and Phil Spector as the key arrivals in the Beatles' endgame, and he noted that Klein was the least famous of the four, but arguably the one who played the biggest role in their demise. Nobody makes Allen Klein broke up the Beatles videos. It does not get clicks, but Klein did more structural damage to the partnership than Yoko ever could, because Klein turned a creative disagreement into a legal war. Phil Spector remixed The Long and Winding Road without McCartney's permission. He added orchestras, choirs, and harps. McCartney was furious. He sent a letter to Klein that said, "Don't do it again." That violation, someone else rewriting his music, was the breaking point. McCartney announced his departure in April 1970. The Daily Mirror ran the headline, "Paul quits the Beatles." Lennon was livid, not because Paul left, but because Paul announced it first. Lennon had wanted to make the announcement 6 months earlier. So look at what actually happened. Lennon wanted out first, Harrison wanted out first, Ringo wanted out first. McCartney was the last one trying to hold it together, and when he finally gave up, he got blamed for breaking it up. Everyone wanted to leave, and nobody wanted to be the villain. They needed a villain who was not one of them. They got Yoko. And Yoko, whether she understood this or not, performed a function that no one has ever given her credit for. She absorbed the blame for 56 years. She became the reason the Beatles ended, which meant Lennon and McCartney never had to fully blame each other. Harrison never had to say publicly that he left because his bandmates treated his songs like filler. Ringo never had to explain that he quit because he felt invisible. The real grievances, McCartney's controlling behavior, Lennon's heroin addiction, Harrison's creative suffocation, the Allen Klein disaster, got buried under the idea that Yoko broke up the Beatles. And because the real grievances stayed buried, the friendships survived. Lennon and McCartney reconciled in the mid-70s. Lennon told NME in January 1974, "Yeah, I miss Paul a lot. Of course, I'd like to see him again. He's an old friend, isn't he?" McCartney and Linda visited Lennon during a recording session later that year. They talked. They laughed. They watched Saturday Night Live together at Lennon's Dakota apartment, the night Lorne Michaels offered the Beatles $3,000 to reunite on the show. Lennon later said they almost went just for the joke. They did not form a band again, but they were friends. When Lennon was murdered in December 1980, McCartney was devastated. Not as a former bandmate, but as someone who had lost a friend he had actually managed to get back. Harrison and McCartney played together again. Starr stayed friends with everyone. The three surviving Beatles reunited in the mid-90s for the Anthology project, recording Free as a Bird and Real Love around old Lennon demos. That would not have happened if they had spent the 70s publicly accusing each other of destroying the band. It happened because Yoko absorbed the narrative, and the four of them were free to remember each other fondly instead of bitterly. Compare that to the Rolling Stones, where the feud between Jagger and Richards nearly destroyed the band in the 80s. Or Pink Floyd, where Waters and Gilmour still will not be in the same room. Or the Kinks, where the Davies brothers hated each other for decades. Those bands did not have a Yoko. They had to blame each other, and the bitterness calcified. The Beatles had Yoko, and whether she was a scapegoat by accident or by design, the result was the same. The four of them got to walk away from the biggest band in history and remain eventually friends. Lennon said it himself, "The dream is over." But the relationships were not gone. Not entirely. Not permanently. Yoko Ono did not kill the Beatles. The Beatles were already dying, of success, of ego, of four people growing in four different directions, at exactly the age when people grow fastest. What Yoko did, without anyone ever thanking her for it, was give them someone to blame who could take it. And because she took it, the story of the Beatles ends with a rooftop concert and Free as a Bird instead of lawsuits and silence. Maybe that is not grace. Maybe it is just how it worked out. But 56 years later, everyone still blames Yoko and nobody blames each other. That might be the most remarkable thing about the end of the Beatles, not how it happened, but how little damage it actually did to the people involved, because all the damage landed on one woman who never got the credit for absorbing it.